Hey there viewers, thank you for tuning into Super Mario Diagnostics once again. Today we have a Volkswagen 2015 Passat. I actually own one of these as well myself. So I'm pretty curious as to what's going to be the problem here. The concern is, well, we got a list actually. The gas gauge doesn't work, the check engine light is on, the outside air temp is inoperative, the AC doesn't work. Well, it wouldn't work if the ambient temp sensor is no good. They took it to the dealer and the ambient temp sensor was replaced and the AC still does not work. They also gave a list of what's going to be the fix. Their diag is, I'm not saying if it's right or wrong. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying what they told him is it's going to need a cluster. It's going to need a wiring overlay from the cluster to the fuel pump, among other things which are necessary to, like based on maintenance and whatnot. So they're saying the cluster is no good and a wiring issue between the fuel pump and the cluster. So let's go ahead and recreate the symptom. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the vehicle, and all of our lights, we've got a oil light on, we've got 11 degrees on there, we have a flat dead fuel gauge, and I'm not going to run it much more than that because, well, maybe the oil level is part of, I don't know, man, I think the oil level speaks directly to the computer. But I do want to check some things. I did a pre-scan, and let's go ahead and take a look at that. Pre-scan shows, I do apologize for the beeping, we'll go through the whole thing. The ECM shows an ambient temp sensor. It shows invalid data received from the cluster. It shows the TPMS, no signal communication. Air conditioning, function limitation due to received malfunction value. In other words, it's not working because it's not receiving the correct value for a certain sensor. The electronic central electric, it's got fog light bulbs, side marker bulbs, and the cluster itself shows fuel level sensor too high, resistance too high, and exterior temperature sensor resistance too high. The gateway is showing telematics control, no signal. Navigation is showing function restriction caused by missing message. And we got some driver door window regulator, no basic settings. That's an easy fix. We got same thing on the passenger side. Our telematics control unit, which was apparently not communicating earlier, according to the gateway, it wasn't communicating. It is, the telematics is reporting control module mobilizer deactivated, and our telephone is showing data bus message missing. So first thing I want to do is do a quick test on the cluster, right? Why not? Oh, sorry, key's not on. Let's go back in there. It's easy enough to do. It's a bidirectional test. We are going to do a sweep test for the fuel gauge and whatnot. We could check active tests. Yes. We'll do fuel gauge and we'll hit start. Oh, it asks us for time limits or not. Let's go over there. Turns the cluster off and it does the sweep. So it's not like our needle is jammed. It's not a GM. Anywho, it will bidirectionally respond to that actuation test. So let's take a look at live data. Let's see what our fuel gauge shows. Fuel level 0 gallons. We got 510 ohms on the fuel level sensor 1. Not sure if there's a fuel level sensor 2. Could be that it doesn't have one. And needle position 0 degrees. Let's check ambient temp. I'm just gonna put temp. Whoops, wrong button. And we have outside temperature 11 degrees, which is obviously not right. Our oil temperature is 100 degrees. Coolant temp is 119. So that's close to each other. That may be fine, but our outside temp is no good. I wonder what's going on there. I think that we may get lucky and find out maybe if we fix whatever is wrong with the fuel gauge, we could probably fix what's wrong with the ambient temp reporting back, and vice versa. Whatever might be the fix for the ambient temp report might be the same fix for the fuel level, or it could be separated stuff. I mean, it could be completely separated things. Maybe the level sensor's shorted, or well, it says resistance too high, so it wouldn't be shorted. It'd probably be, you know, more like closer to a open circuit. That would have us believe that with higher voltage, like the closer it is to 5 volts, the less level it reports. And we know that ambient temp sensor with an open circuit, it will go to -40, at least in most cars. I haven't personally tried it on this one, but every ambient temperature sensor that I've seen in my life has shown an open circuit being at -40 degrees. And if you were to short it to ground, it would be higher than 290, maybe 260, maybe higher than that. But the point I'm trying to say is that maybe there's a common denominator here. Maybe it's the cluster. We're going to find out. Let's go ahead and diagnose this thing. I think that the easiest thing we could go for is the ambient temp sensor. So I went ahead and looked at the diagram, and we could see here that the ambient temp sensor is a 2-wire sensor, and it doesn't tell us which one is the supply, which one is the ground, but we do see that this is a shared wire here. So I think we could go ahead and test that way. I already gained access to it. It is over here. I've got this thing set up. You can see our sensor right there. And I'm going to pull up live data. And when I disconnect it, I want to see if there's any reaction actually. So let's go ahead and look at our live data and disconnect this thing. We've got 11 degrees there. When I disconnect it, it goes -58, not -40. Let me reconnect it. 10 degrees. So I could see why they would replace the ambient temp sensor, but I don't think our test is done. Like, we don't know. That might tell us that our 5-volt reference is good. It's a 2-wire system. It's probably exactly like a coolant temp sensor. 2-wire systems usually have a ground and a 5-volt reference, which is the signal. So based on the resistance that is passing through that sensor, that 5-volt reference is being pulled down to ground. So what we want to do is check our scope, and I got my scope down here. What I'm going to do is back probe each wire, right? So we go ahead and back probe. I have it disconnected still, and we got our 5-volt right there. Sorry, that's me actually. We got a 5-volt per division, and we have 1 division, so our 5-volt signal is good. Let's go to our other wire. Okay, so this is a simple circuit. This is not a pulse width modulated circuit. Why is it doing this, right? This is supposed to be my ground. What's it giving me here? Does it really matter? It's supposed to be a ground. This is not a ground. So it doesn't really matter what it is, to be honest with you. But in my mind, we know that this line underneath this waveform is a perfect 0. Right? If I was to disconnect it, that's perfect 0. That's perfect 0. If our ground was good, that's where it would be. But we have this, and they both come directly, both of these wires come directly from the cluster. What's going on there? Do we have a bad ground? I want to prove it. I'm going to disconnect, I'm going to reconnect my sensor and back probe that same wire. And that is not my 5-volt wire. This is my ground. This is supposed to be my ground here. We have an elevated ground here. This is not good. So I'm going to grab a wire actually and ground it and piggyback this same wire, and hopefully it'll give us something good here in our live data. So I'm gonna go ahead and connect it right about now. Nice. See that? 86 degrees. This one may take a while. I know one of them kind of takes a while. And look at our ground. Our ground is good now. Some vehicles, you got to be careful with the ambient temp sensor. You can't expect it to just be like that. Yes, we have live data and all that. That's great. But if you don't have live data, some Jaguars don't have live data. If you don't have live data and you're testing ambient temp sensor, it won't update until you pass 15 miles an hour or something like that. It doesn't want to give a false reading, so it would rather wait till you start hitting the road before it starts updating the temperature. So to reiterate, we've got our good ground. I'm going to disconnect this wire and take a look at live data. It goes right back to 11.3. We've got our crappy ground again. I'm going to reconnect it. And you know what? I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to disconnect this. I'm going to leave the ground connected. I'm going to lower the car and see if by any miracle our fuel level is good now. I don't expect it to be, but you never know. What if this thing just has a bad ground? And no joy, fellas, that was not going to fix everything. I wasn't expecting it to, but one can hope, right? Our fuel gauge is still low, and our displayed temperature is exactly what live data told us it would be, 11 degrees. I'm gonna check this oil level if possible. Yeah, we have a dipstick. I'm gonna check this oil level before we continue off camera, because I don't like it. And we're gonna see what the next step is, because either way we know for a fact that we have a bad ground to the ambient temp sensor. Now, I didn't pay attention. Which wire is it? I would imagine it would have to be this brown and blue, because it's shared, you know, it would share ground with another sensor, and that would be our signal back. This would be our signal back, but this is an HVAC diagram. Let's go to the instrument cluster diagram and see what's going on here. Instrument panel cluster. Of course, we have all this stuff here. Instrument panel cluster circuit. And it would be nice to just, there it is. There's our single wire right there, which is our brown and yellow, and then we have another one that it's just going everywhere. Hey, guess what? It shares something with the fuel pump control module. It does share something, so I am giving it ground to the fuel pump control module, but we still have a problem. We still have a problem now. Question is the instrument cluster providing this ground? I see all of these sensors getting provided a ground, but I don't see an actual ground. So I think the cluster is the one responsible for providing that ground. That means that we're going to have no choice but to check powers and grounds to the cluster itself. It might not be, obviously the cluster is on right now, so it has some ground there. But it might be another ground that it needs, and it's not transferring it over to these sensors. Now, they could be right. Maybe it does need a cluster. We'll know that once we check powers and grounds and everything is confirmed to be good into the cluster. All right, so we've got the approval to remove the cluster, and I'm going to go ahead and remove it, check my powers and grounds, but I think first I'm going to scope that same wire to see if the same thing that's coming out of the cluster is the same thing that we saw at the ambient temp sensor, and ground it from there if that's the case, and see if our fuel gauge comes back alive, or if there truly is an open circuit or high resistance in the harness to the fuel pump module. So that's going to be our next step. I'm not going to film the disassembly. I'm just going to, once I get it disassembled, we're going to jump right back into the video. All right, So we are in. We let go of the connector, found pin 20 red and blue, which is our ground supply to our sensors. I went ahead and removed the connector cover. All the legwork has been done. Well, not all of it, but basically, not to bore you to death, I went ahead and set up my scope, and I'm gonna go ahead and turn on the cluster, right? Or we still have 9 degrees and a dead fuel level gauge, and we have the same exact thing coming right out of the cluster. It is an elevated ground. I think it's even around the 5 volt. That's probably going through sensors or even the fuel pump control module and coming back to the ground supply wire, which is what we're tapped into, and that's what we're seeing. Now, does that tell us that our splice is good? Possibly. Don't know yet, but what we could do is ground out that wire. So I'm going to take my ground that I have here, and obviously my scope will not be used anymore, and I'm going to ground that wire, and I'm just going to cycle the key just to play it safe. Hey, guess what? Our fuel level gauge is on, but our ambient temp sensor is at 9 degrees. I would have to check live data, but let's do some wiggling. Oops. So it doesn't need a harness to the fuel gauge. Let's go ahead and pull up our scanner real quick. And I put it away because I'm already almost calling it a day today. But we should be able to read it. Let's go ahead, let's go back to live data. Let's go to ambient temp. Oh wait, not ambient temp. Let's just go to temp. Huh. That's interesting. Why is it showing 9.5 when I'm grounding it? Is there a splice issue? That is super weird. Somehow our ground that we're providing here is making it to the fuel pump. And look, the fuel pump just died. The fuel pump just went zero. What is going on? I know my ground is good. Let's turn off the cluster, turn it back on. We've got nothing everywhere. Unless, of course, I knocked my ground loose. And yeah, the whole thing went to crap right now. I'm gonna have to fetch that back probe. It is back here. And I'm gonna go back into my pin 20. Make sure I'm properly seated. And connect my scope. Normally I don't have a camera. For everyone who thinks that I'm going about this the long way, I'm holding a camera and explaining everything. So our temp is rising. Our live data shows good. But what's going on with the fuel gauge? Let me turn off the car and then put on our key again. Noise. I know what it is. I know what was the problem. It wasn't my ground being loose. We've got good outside temp. It's my back probe. This back probe sheath, it fits very loose here. I gotta cut the sheath in order for it to sit well. I know you guys don't really care about this, but if anybody, I'm pretty sure somebody's seen this before. This is a Fluke brand, if I'm not mistaken, and it's barely making contact. That is my fault right there. That is my fault. Test your equipment, fellas, and know the limitations of each one, and obviously know the strategies, because that fuel level sensor stays down until you cycle the key. The ambient temp sensor will update, but know the strategies, fellas. You gotta cycle the key in order for that sucker to come back alive. So what does this mean? This means that our splice is good. I haven't even checked my powers and grounds yet. But if there's one power and ground into this cluster, I think my diag is done. Plain and simple, this cluster would not be on. This cluster's hot. This cluster would not be on if it only had one power, one ground supply. This cluster would not be on right now, and my diag would be done. That means that the cluster is the problem. Unless there was a shorted sensor, but if it was a shorted sensor, it would blow a fuse. A shorted sensor bringing it up to 5 volts. No, it would bring down the 5 volts. I'm thinking this wrong. I'm thinking out loud here, fellas. I'm thinking out loud. Let's check to see our ground. We have one ground here, and this is a complete diagram. How do we know this? We have a solid line, and I'm talking to myself. Oh man, this stuff is not easy. I'm gonna leave this in the video. I'm here facing the camera myself, thinking that I'm screen recording, and this is a different computer. I don't have a screen recorder on this one. This solid line shows that we have a full diagram. If it was a dotted line, that means it would be incomplete, and we have only one ground supply. Oh my goodness, all data added again. We have only one ground supply to the cluster. Our diag is done, fellas. I know some of you are not gonna like that. Some of you would say, check your powers and grounds anyway. Our diag is done, and if I give a good ground to pin 16, which is a solid brown, I can guarantee you it won't make a difference, and we're gonna do that right now. Pin 16 solid brown is way over here, and of course I'm dealing with this probe issue, but I'm gonna double check everything. It's amateur hour over here, right? I bet that's what you're thinking. I'm still grounded. I'm gonna turn on my key, and my live data still shows 9.5. And my level sensor is dead. I'm double checking my probe. Basically what I'm doing is giving it a redundant ground to the ground supply in order to rule out a ground supply issue. We've ruled out a ground supply issue. The cluster is the problem. This doesn't need an overlay. Would the dealer have fixed it? Yes, pretty sure they would have fixed it. Am I gonna get on their case because they maybe overdid it with the overlay part? I don't even see a labor line for the overlay. They didn't. I don't even know. I can't explain that. I'm not gonna try to. This thing needs a cluster. The immobilizer is in the cluster. Let's go ahead and get an approval. And this will be an Otis job. Otis is the factory tool for this, and it is by far the easiest way to change a cluster on this thing. And don't know if it'll allow a used one. I know that's an option. There's nothing wrong with it, an option, but I don't know that it will allow for it. I know that you can do a used ECM on this using the factory scan tool, no problem, but I don't know about a cluster, especially an immobilizer, with the immobilizer being in it. So the good thing is that we can communicate with it if it needs to pull the coding out of it. In some cases it tells you to connect the old one first, shut off the vehicle, and then connect the new cluster, and then you're good to go. But it's just something to keep in mind. It's a good thing to have. It's when something's communicating and it's failed in a different way. We might be able to open it. I'm not gonna. Honestly, that's where things get tricky. If any of you have seen Jeff Escort LX, he's like the cluster king. I've opened up and fixed several clusters, but in my experience, you have to. Those are the kind of things that you break before you get good at it. So I've opened up clusters to practice, just to try to get better at it. But for me to tell you that I'm gonna be able to fix this thing, I'd be lying. Unless it's something super friggin' obvious, I don't see how I would be able to fix this internally. And I'm going to recommend a new cluster above all, and take it from there. See if we get an approval. I think I'm going to just take a quick look at this thing. We haven't spoken to the customer yet, but figure why not take a quick look. If it's more complex than I'm comfortable with, then well, I'll just put this plate back on. But every cluster is different. You never know what you're gonna find. Maybe we get lucky. I'm kind of curious as to what the problem might be. We know it's pin 20, and let me see if you guys can see this. We do have numbers on here, so we have a 17 up here on the upper left corner. Excuse me. And it's 4 pins down from there. Let's see if this thing will just lift off. Yes, it will. Nice. This is where things get risky because, you know, well, on one hand, the customer has no choice but to replace the cluster, right? So I guess it couldn't possibly be any worse. I don't see anything on this side. I'm gonna take a look at the pins on this side. Maybe it's a cold solder joint. I do see something. It's gonna be extremely hard to see on camera. I think we should put this thing under the microscope. I think I see something, and I want to put it under the microscope, so we'll take you guys along. There may be an open circuited trace here. Let's go ahead and put this thing under the scope and take a look. So we are underneath the scope, and as you can see, there's our 17. We need to be on pin 20, and we flip it around. I think I saw something. Go ahead and take a look at those pins. Let me focus this a little bit better for you guys. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a connection there. If you look, I'll bring it closer for you guys. Check that out. Hopefully you guys can see this very clearly. We got an open trace there. Maybe that acts as a fuse. This cluster may be fixable, repairable. We may be able to save the customer a lot of money on this, by not having to replace the cluster, do the programming and all that good stuff. The only issue is that I have is that it's not like my soldering iron. Well, maybe I would probably be melting a lot of stuff, but ideally we're gonna want to disassemble this cluster in order to gain more access. that's pretty lucky. Sometimes it's awesome to get lucky. Just out of curiosity, decided to open this thing. It doesn't get better than that. That makes you wonder though, like what would cause that, right? That's acting like a fuse. Something blew that out, and I'm not gonna say that it was intentional or that it was. All I can say for sure is that a 5-volt reference short would not have caused this. The only thing that could cause this is if somebody put 12 volts in there during testing. I'm not gonna say it's malicious, I don't know, but I know for a fact that this would not have happened unless this was a defect, a manufacturer defect. But it could be either or. I'm not going to get into the whole thing whether they did this on purpose or if they actually put the 12 volts, but the only way I can see is if it's either a manufacturer's defect in which it could not handle the load in that circuit up until now, or somebody put 12 volts into this thing and killed that trace, maybe during testing. So that's one of the important things about having those power probes, and knowing what circuit you're working on, knowing the way it's supposed to be, as opposed to giving something voltage where it's not supposed to be. You know, if I'm not saying that's what happened, but familiarize yourself with the circuit that you're working on, familiarize yourself with the systems before testing. I'm not saying that that's what happened. I'm saying I probably can't say it enough, but before I start to even attempt to disassemble this thing, I need to get an approval, because there's a very, very real chance that this will not be fixed. And if the customer is not ready to approve a cluster in the event that this doesn't fix it, then I think we would be, realistically wasting our time. Not to mention, like, yes, I've fixed clusters before, but it doesn't mean that it's gone perfectly each and every single time. There is the very real possibility, let's be honest, there's the very real possibility that, maybe something would break in the attempt to repair it. And it can happen to, that's a very real possibility with anything really, circuit board stuff. But the only other option the customer would have is to replace the cluster, because most shops, they're not going to open this thing. They wouldn't even look at it. I even originally said that I wasn't going to look at it. But now that we see something, we have a good lead as to what may be an issue here. We're giving the customer an alternative, an option. But we have to prepare them in the event that it doesn't work. It's a reality that it's there with any circuit board repair, or any cluster repair for that matter. What I'm trying to say is that by giving them the option, it shouldn't tie us to guaranteeing the outcome, because we're doing something that nobody, I could count with my hands how many people would actually attempt to do this repair. I'm sure there's plenty of you out there, but that I know personally, I could count with my hands how many people would even attempt to do this repair. If they go to any shop locally, I can guarantee you they're probably not going to find a shop there that will go ahead and open this and attempt to fix it. So what I'm trying to say is, by giving that option, we shouldn't put ourselves in a corner to guarantee the outcome, and in the event that it doesn't work or something happens, we become at fault. It shouldn't be that way, in my opinion. I think that by giving them the option, they stand to save a lot of money, but they should be ready in the event that we cannot fix it, which is a very real possibility. Maybe we fix this trace and we find out that when we connect it, it blows again. We don't know. Even though I gave it an extra ground and nothing happened to my leads, of course it was a better connection, but what I'm trying to say is I proved that by giving it a ground, there's no short. If there was a short, my leads would have gotten hot, or something would have happened. So, but this is also stands to be a good test to confirm that everything else will be operating as designed once we fix this trace issue here. And if the customer decided, you know what, I'd rather go with a new one, that's fine. We're going to present them with the options. And at least we have that option. Options are a good thing. Never look down on different options unless they are proven not to work. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and seek approval and take it from there. So we got the go ahead and the customer's blessing to continue on with the repair. So we're going to give it our best shot. I went ahead and took off the needles before I picked up the camera. And that really was the main issue for me, was like getting those needles out without breaking anything. Other than that, I think it should be smooth sailing. It looks pretty easy. I see one ribbon, I guess you could call it ribbon cable here, and it has a couple of detents. That's all I've seen so far that holds this thing down. It's a really simple setup. It should be it. And it is. We got a circuit board all by itself here. And let's go ahead and put this under the scope. And there it is. We have our broken trace. I'm gonna zoom this in just a little bit more and get it in focus. And hopefully the camera is perfectly in focus. I do apologize for the vibration. That's part of the articulating arm that we have here. Let's go ahead and run a wire between the two. If the solder allows us to, we could just bridge it using solder alone, but I'm not going to count on that. I'm going to start with some flux, and we're going to pre-tin these pads. Let's go ahead and get some solder in here. Look at those traces. That trace is no good. I don't think solder will actually reach between the two. So I'm going to use enameled wire in order to do this job. Not that I have to use enameled wires, but I don't see the problem. Basically, enameled wire is protected, it's insulated, hence enameled. So that's just so that I would not short circuit against anything else. It is a ground circuit. Am I worried about that necessarily? Not necessarily. And it's even thicker than the trace that was there before. And I'm basically just gonna heat up the enameling off. Once it sticks to our circuit here, we know that we're good to go. And there it has stuck to our circuit there. And I hope you guys can see everything clearly. I'm basically just gonna press down here. I should probably use more flux actually. Let me put some more flux in there. It is the shortest wire I think I've ever ran. And there it is. The fix is done. Let's go ahead and we're done. That is it. That is the fix. We're running a new trace. This is like a fusible link. And of course we're gonna have to check our pads, make sure everything is good. And I need new tweezers. We are tight. We're not using these right here. We're gonna clean this sucker up and get this thing back into the vehicle and check to make sure that our fuel gauge is good and that our ambient temp sensor is reading correctly and that our AC works. A cluster ground issue caused our AC to not work. And in Florida, that's where I am, I'm in Miami, Florida, AC is paramount. You will not see, I mean, if you don't have AC work coming into your shop, you are in trouble down here. Yep. We're done. Let's go ahead and install this thing and get to the moment of truth. Alright, so we got the needles back on. And you guys won't be able to see it, but this is in fact the same unit. You know, there's always going to be naysayers, what can I say? But, anywho, let's go ahead and put this sucker back in there. I'm not going to fully nail it down yet. I'm just going to mock it up and put it in the vehicle. Let's go ahead and do so. Way over here. Let's go ahead and turn on the key. Nice. And I forgot to add the oil that, like I said, I would. We have 83 degrees Fahrenheit, and we have good AC, good fuel gauge. So will our AC run? I don't see why not. I actually did add oil, but I didn't add enough, I guess. I don't have a thermometer with me. It's only about half a quart low. It's still in the dipstick, on the lower half of the dipstick. And our AC is working, slowly but surely. Nice. We're gonna have a very happy customer here. Let's call it a fix. I'm just as glad as the customer that it is fixed. So I hope this video was useful. It goes to show that curiosity can really help sometimes. You know, it doesn't hurt to open something up. And I would say, if you're thinking about getting into this kind of stuff, you know, all those modules that you've replaced and programmed new ones into, and you've chucked the old modules. Don't chuck them. Stop chucking them. Put them aside. And when you have free time or whenever you're down, open those suckers up. Get good at opening them up. I did have my doubts as to whether I would be able to open it up without damaging it, but that's with anything. It's a natural thing. Even if I do 200-300 of these, I don't know that I'll have the confidence to tell the customer, yeah, we could fix it 100% without a problem, no problem whatsoever. Some things are more brittle than others. Some clusters are made, they make it so that you cannot service them. Some items, not just clusters, it could be certain modules. Like certain modules, if you open up that case, you pretty much destroyed the case of that module. So my advice would be practice. Don't forget the strategy. At first, when I first saw the fuel gauge not coming up, and I saw that the ambient temp sensor did come up when I provided it ground from the front, that was simply because I didn't cycle the key. It was later then I realized, oh, we got to cycle the key. So keep in mind of those strategies and things like that. And I hope this was all useful. I hope it all made sense, and I hope it brings you one step closer to becoming more proficient with diagnostic strategy and whatnot, especially with electrical. Thank you all for taking the time to watch. I appreciate each and every single one of you. If I earned your subscription, consider subscribing. Hit that bell notification so you can know when I come out with a new video. It seems I'm like, I don't know, I've been trying to get more content out there for you guys, hoping you guys are finding it useful. Thanks again for all the support, everyone, and if you have any questions, leave it in the comment section, and don't forget to hit like, and until next time.